it's kind of hard to explain how ADHD works because it affects a very particular process in the brain. There's this professor on Instagram that equates it as a metaphor to erectile dysfunction, where it's not because you don't have that feeling or because you have that desire. It's not because you don't want to. Your body just for some reason doesn't.
Oh, wow.
And there's no feeling behind it. You don't feel it not doing that. It just doesn't happen.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to school. But don't worry, everything is cool. I'm your host, Jalissa, and of course, I am here with the boys, Steve and Brennan. Say what's up, you guys.
What's up?
And we got a special guest today. We got Rian Reyes from Un Poquito Podcast.
Hello. Ryan's our first guest, guys. Yay. Like, it's poetic. I was saying right before the show that last year, your brother was our first guest. Who's actually here. I'm not going to pretend like he's not. He's off camera, but he's here too. Yeah, so this is poetic, and I'm glad to have you on the show, Ryan.
Oh, yeah.
So excited to have you on today. I feel like, I mean, of course, we talked about your brother, but we really want to get to know you. So tell us about yourself.
I mean, the first thing I usually tell people is I'm autistic. It explains a lot of the vibes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also currently, I like you said, I mostly do the podcast, Un Poquito, and then I'm also a stand-up comedian in Los Angeles.
Nice. How did you get into comedy?
So me and my brothers have always like been into the comedy scene. Like, we watched specials as kids. Our dad got us into comedy really early. He'd like come home he was a trucker. He'd come home from trips and bring like DVDs of In Living Color and old SNL tapes. And it was kind of the thing that we all bonded over. And it's something that I always enjoyed. We don't have it anymore, but there's literally like a video of me at like 7 when they ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I literally said stand-up comedian. So it's something I knew I always wanted to try. But after I graduated high school, I was always hesitant to like go for it. And then one year, I think I'm 21, and I just got off of work. I was working with Dominic at the time at a place called Lost Art Liquids. And normally I take like a 2-hour bus ride home because we live in LA County, but not Los Angeles. And so I'm heading home, and I'm kind of heading home early, and I don't have anything to do. And I don't remember like what the reasoning was, but the bus I take stops near Pasadena. So instead of going straight home, I just decided to go to. Sorry, brain farted for a second. I decided to go to the Ice House in Old Town, because I knew of it because I used to go to PCC, and so I would hear about it a lot. And I arrived like right before the show started, and I saw on the marquee that Drew Lynch was performing, and this was like 2 years after he was on America's Got Talent, so I was super excited. And I watched the show, and afterward, his opener, I forget his name because it's been like 8 years, I think, at this point, but his opener comes out, and he's just hanging out having a cigarette, and I started up a conversation with him, and I asked him how long he's been doing it and like what actually goes into doing it. And now that I've like been doing it a while, it feels like a silly question to ask, like, how do you get into it? Because he gave me the answer that I literally to this day give everyone else. It's like, you just start going to mics. And he said they have a mic here I think at that time it was every Wednesday. So that next week I got my brothers to drive me back to Ice House, and I tried the open mic there for the first time. And I don't think my jokes were where they are now, but I did well. Like, I got laughs. People were coming up to me after the mic saying I did a good job. And so from that point on, I try to go as much as possible.
I love I remember always seeing the video that you do in your stand up about your voice.
Yeah.
About how people are like, about the call, especially when you get from the phone service.
Oh yeah.
And they're like, they think you're a little kid.
Yeah, that was that was a weird one. That one happened like that same year actually. Um it's something about when I'm on the phone, I either get mistaken for a child or I get mistaken for my mom.
You have a super joyful like hello. That's one thing that I've
Yeah.
noticed since the second I met you.
Yeah, that it comes from kind of a funny place because by now it's kind of like my catchphrase.
Mm-hmm.
But it happened on accident. Because I'm autistic, I struggle with like remembering the rules of like being social. Like I was the kid that would always be silent at every family function, and my mom had to like drag me to every like relative and be like, make sure you say hi to your Theo and your Thea, and so after a while, it became like a reflex in my brain where I had to say hello. But what happened before is I didn't have any energy behind it because I was saying it like it was my job to say it.
Mm-hmm. Like
To be like
forced.
hello, yeah, and it would. So then people thought I was angry all the time. So I had to like train myself to say it nice so that I would sound friendly. So there's like these small rules that I would keep in my brain every time I met someone new where I was like, make sure you look them in the eye. Make sure a big thing was I had to make sure to widen my eyebrows because it makes me seem a lot friendlier than if I'm like, hello. Because when my face rests naturally, I look angry. And I made sure I had to like put the up inflection, so it eventually like became what it is now. It's like hello, and I did it so many times that it's just like it's. I do it as an intentional catchphrase now in my set, but it's still like automatic. I'm not doing it on purpose. It's just how I say hello now.
Mm-hmm. Is that just like one of the many things that you have to do more consciously, you think, than other people?
Yeah, it's part of a concept that we talk about a lot, the autistic community, called masking. Where because we don't react or interact the way people expect us to, it's something that's commented on a lot. You know, like we're told we don't smile a lot, we always look angry, or we say awkward things. So everyone's experience is different. Every autistic person's experience is different, but the consistency of it is that we are kind of like teaching ourselves the rules of society.
Oh wow!
And it's this thing I talk about a lot, where it's like every neurodivergent person has an imaginary rule book that they have to learn because they're always getting in trouble when they don't follow the rules, and then they become adults and they wonder why nobody else knows the rules, and it's frustrating because it's like I'm following the rules you gave me, but you're not following them. So what do I do now?
Well, that's crazy because it makes me think: is there any societal rules that you think is like bullshit, like, or that you don't? It's harder for you to grasp that you're like, I don't get why we even do this to begin with.
There's like small things, and it's not with everyone, but like, I don't like having. I don't hate it, but I don't like having to like knuckle bump or high five someone every time. Like it comes naturally if it's someone that I am familiar with in that way. You know what I mean? Like my podcast co-hosts, my friends, and my family. But when it's a dude that I've just seen more than once, but we don't talk at all, and it feels weird to me. And I run into the situation a lot of times where they'll hold it up, and I don't notice right away because I don't think of them that way. And then like they'll start tugging my shirt and like getting me to turn around. It's like, all right, fine.
I get you. Yeah, it's kind of obviously not the same way, but for me, I've struggled with the like dab ups. You know how people dab people up? I've never get it right. Like I never get it right. I always and then it makes it worse because I see online like TikToks that are like, you're corny if you do the like, I think it's like the dab up and then the fist bump. And I always do that, and I'm like, damn, now I'm corny. Like I feel like I'm being judged. I feel like I hate it, so I get you 100% because I can't even imagine just the fist bump too. I wish I could just fist bump people instead of having to dab them up.
Yeah, that's like one of those little like things. That's something I think about a lot. Where I think if it's a clap back and then knuckle bump, then it looks forced. You have to like pull their fingers and do that first, and then.
Yeah.
And that's like the thing is like nobody else thinks about this, but this is the kind of stuff I'm thinking about every time I'm in public.
Yeah. I get you.
Yeah, I feel like I don't really know much about like autism and all those things. So what you're telling me is pretty much really new to me. But going more into that, what would you say is just some things that like I guess people should be more aware of when being like around?
I mean, what I try to push for, because a lot of people, when they ask me about, what should I know or shouldn't know, and it's like, uh, it's okay if people don't know immediately. But I always encourage people to just take the time to research on their own, because that's the thing is like, just like any other marginalized group, after a while, nobody wants to be somebody else's tutor all the time, like constantly reminding them of the rules and everything. They have to do that on their own in their own heads. They don't want to do that for other people. But there are some things that come up a lot, like even people only like 3-4 years older than me, they'll say stuff like, well, we just didn't have that when I was growing up. It's like, well, you didn't have the resources, but autism's existed as a diagnosis for almost 200 years. Like, it's been a thing for a while.
Oh, so have you met people who are like, oh, autism, like that just doesn't exist, like it wasn't a thing?
Yeah, especially when I first got diagnosed. I got diagnosed, I think, my sophomore year of high school. But we were looking into it like since middle school and above. Even in my family, there was people that I had to convince, like, no, I am different, and they'd be like, well, all of a sudden you have all these problems. Like, no, I have names for my problems. The problems existed before. They're things that you commented on all the time. You know what I mean? Like, when I it's no judgment towards my family or anything, but I was seen as like an excited, like rambunctious kid or a weird kid, and it's like, this is why, Or I would tell them, like, those instances where you couldn't understand why I didn't understand what you were saying. This is why, there's a communication barrier, because part of autism is it's a developmental disorder. It's in several categories. It's a behavioral disorder and a neurodivergency and a disability. But part of it is developmental dysfunction. I don't learn the same way everyone else learns. And there was always hints of that in my upbringing. But I coped with it enough that I got by, so it made it harder for people to believe there was something not wrong but different about me. Like, one thing I think my mom remembers, but a lot of my other family has a hard time remembering, is I didn't speak until I was like 4 years old. But I knew how to communicate. Like, I understood communication. I understood when people told me to do things, I did them. I knew, like, I was in like a higher percentile in a lot of categories, like color recognition and shape recognition, stuff like that. Even earlier than my brothers, it was just that one category where I was different. I didn't speak until like I was almost 5 years old.
Do you have, you probably don't have memories of that stage in your life, do you? Because I was going to ask.
I can't remember like infancy, but I have memories from being a toddler, like 3 and older is.
Yeah, because I guess I was wondering, like, is it that you knew how to speak and you chose not to, or is it that you just couldn't, like...
What I remember it feeling like was I understood that language was a thing, but nobody ever expected me to try it. And from my, like, how I perceived it. And what I remember feeling was like, I knew other people did that. I didn't know I could do that. And so I didn't know what it felt like until I actually tried it. I don't remember what my first words were. The first time my mom says she remembers me speaking was I learned the lyrics to Angel Baby by Shaggy, and I was singing the chorus when it was on the radio. Whenever it was on the radio, I'd sing the chorus.
Oh.
It's all good, bro. It's all good.
Well, I have a question if I can jump in really quickly. So you mentioned that I like how you painted it, that your problems always existed. You just kind of now have a name for them.
Right.
I guess a lot of what I see when it comes to mental illness, mental disorders, anything having to do with the mind, at least from my experience of what I see, there's a lot of just, I guess the interpretation a lot of people have is that it's a mentality. It's not like a thing. I'm not too familiar with what that looks like with someone who's on the spectrum. Is that something you run into a lot?
Yeah, not only with, so I have multiple, what's the word, correlates, not correlizing, but diagnoses that exist at the same time. I have more than one. The main three from my original diagnosis were autism, ADHD, and OCD. And so because of that, learning about those three different things, I became not only an advocate for autism, but for those as well. Mostly because I had to advocate for myself. You know, I had to understand where I was capable and where I absolutely was not, so that I knew what I was standing up for when I needed to. And that came with its own set of problems. It was a thing where, especially with people who didn't have me constantly in their daily life, it was a thing that they couldn't fully recognize without that context. So, like, I'd be trying to explain how ADHD works, and they'd be like, well, I think that's just a focus issue. I think that's just like a drive issue. And technically, they're not wrong, but it's not coming from a place of
choice
or directive. And in fact, it's kind of hard to explain how ADHD works because it affects a very particular process in the brain. There's this professor on Instagram that equates it as a metaphor to erectile dysfunction, where it's not because you don't have that feeling or because you have that desire. It's not because you don't want to. Your body just for some reason doesn't.
Oh, wow.
And there's no feeling behind it. You don't feel it not doing that. It just doesn't happen. It's kind of like, to reference No Way Home. I don't know if you guys saw that movie.
Yeah.
When Tobey Maguire's like, I don't do breathing. It just happens. Like, it's the same thing in reverse, or it just doesn't happen. So like earlier, there was an example earlier where I had too many thoughts going on, so I had brain farted. That's the thing I had to like overcome with podcasting, because when we were with Isimo, it happened like all the time. For the first like 7 episodes, it was a huge problem where I couldn't find the thought, and the more that I stressed myself out about it, the more my brain just like stopped wanting to function, and I couldn't even like vocalize it. My brain didn't even know how to say the words I am dysfunctioning right now. I just had to sit there quietly and weird out my co-hosts until I found it again.
Yeah, well, I was wondering about that. Is like, how does it affect your you pursuing comedy? Like, how was that not intimidating at first? Because you said you found out your sophomore year of high school, right?
Yeah.
I imagine that was before you took that lead of like, I want to pursue stand up. How did that affect that?
Honestly, it's hard to say, because the thing that was focused on when I first got diagnosed was the autism, because there was a lot more resources at the time available for autism, and it seemed to be the biggest thing affecting me. So when it comes to ADHD and my understanding of it, that didn't happen until after high school, probably even after I started doing stand-up. But there were moments that ironically affected me more in my day-to-day life than it did on stage. I would even say doing stand-up kind of helped me cope with my ADHD and my autism.
Oh, wow.
One issue that I had, especially as I became an adult, was it was incredibly hard for me to meet new people. Once you got to know me, I was very talkative, but until that happened, I almost never spoke to new people. And it made it hard to function in public, literally until I was like maybe in my 20s, like well into my 20s, I would even say. Whenever I'd go out, I'd have to have someone with me in case I couldn't talk. Like even going to McDonald's, I'd have my little brother order for me. I'd pay and I'd take him there, but he'd have to order. And being on stage and sorry, there's tape. I have OCD. Being on stage made me comfortable talking in front of strangers because, ironically, like I have a light sensitivity and astigmatism. So on stage, I can't see anybody because the glare is blanking out the room. I know they're there, but I don't have to look at anybody. And that like started this process in my brain that made me comfortable enough to like now I can do those things. Now I can completely, at least in a social sense, function on my own.
That's kind of fascinating. It makes it sound like it when you do stand up, it's a lot more difficult than other like regular stand ups. Because I mean, I find it intimidating just to be in front of people trying to tell jokes. And I imagine when you bomb, it's probably like the worst feeling ever. But for you, that like the fact that people are almost invisible to you,
Yeah,
I think is insane. And I wanted to also touch a little bit on what was it like the post before you knew your diagnosis of having autism to the pre? Like, did you feel as though like it all made sense and that was comforting, or was it the opposite?
To be honest, at least that very first year, I was kind of resistant to it. And I think that, that goes along with a lot of people's stories, especially people of color, when getting diagnosed, where because it goes back to the thing I said about the rule book, because you're trying so hard to follow everyone else's rules, it feels that much more anxiety driven, and like it's just so much more pressure on it when someone points out that you're different. So to get diagnosed is like a very huge hurdle internally, because you want to be able to cope with these things and learn how to do better for yourself, but at the same time that comes with acknowledging that something is wrong, something is different, and has been the whole time. It's definitely something I've overcome, and it's definitely like the hugest thing I like talking about. Especially, I have a lot of fans who are teetering or just coming to terms with it, and so I think it's a important part of the journey of like overcoming that feeling on the inside before you are ready to like tell people about it. Because I know people who are completely functioning members of society, and then they get diagnosed, and now like they don't want to acknowledge the things that they did to cope in kind of a negative way. Like there's a lot of people with ADHD get very little sleep, so they use that time to like drive themselves to work all the time. They work late, and then you point out that it's because they have ADHD and hyperfocus, and now they can't do it the same way anymore. They can't trick themselves into doing it anymore. They have to acknowledge when they're tired and need rest. And to them, that is harming them because they can't progress the way they did before, because now they know that they were progressing in a kind of toxic way.
Yeah, it makes me think. I wonder if more people are on the spectrum than like there's led to believe, because I wonder if there's that stigma of
Right.
I don't want to be seen as this type of person, but yet the signs are all there.
Yeah, as it stands, last time I checked, in the United States at least, the percentage of acknowledged people with autism is like 0.01% of the population. So there's a lot of us that believe it's probably not a lot more than that. It's still definitely like a fraction of the population, but that fraction is probably a lot bigger than we know. Not only because of people that are afraid to get diagnosed, not only because of the stigma, but also because of the kind of bias of the criteria. Not the criteria itself, but the people that implement it. There's a long-standing history of racial bias and gender bias when it comes to being diagnosed. If I remember correctly, people of color are 30% more likely to be misdiagnosed or dismissed.
Really?
And women, I think, are something like 50% more likely. So a woman of color is like 67 to 70%. That part could be me making up the math. But yeah.
What I thought I was going to add on to it is that I think one of the reasons that I can just come up off the fly and say that I think why people don't fully acknowledge it is that it's one thing to already be part of a marginalized group, like if you're a person of color, but then to be a marginalized group within the marginalized group is very intimidating,
There's
I
like
imagine.
a feeling of separation from that, because you're not only, because I think that being put in those boxes can be in the long run not damaging, but like disadvantaging. That's not a word. It can be a disadvantage to people in the long run because they're not putting themselves in the box. That box is being imposed. But one thing that's a common plus side of that is you find common ground with everyone else in that box. So something like this creates a further separation within that box, and I think, that can be very isolating.
Well, do you have any experience? Do you have any experience with the way that people treated you before and after they find out about the fact that you have autism?
It varies. The funniest response, I have a joke about it, is like someone will be chill with me. They might like look at me like I'm a weird guy, but then when they finally find out that I'm autistic, because it makes sense now, they feel bad for how they were treating me, so they overcorrect. And they start talking to me like a camp counselor. They're like, "Hey, buddy, how you doing?" I definitely had someone who I was like friends with in high school, and once he found out I was autistic, he talked to me like I was like 10 years old.
Yeah.
So I just stopped talking to him.
Yeah, because you're very sharp. It's not like, because I'm sure there's different levels of the spectrum too, right?
Right.
What's it like when you meet somebody else who is on the spectrum?
I mean, it varies. Like that. Before I get into, I won't over. I had tendency to over explain because of the autism.
And Dominic's smoking on the side over here. Ignore him.
He wants to be in the spotlight, bro. So bad.
It's literally coming out of him. Yeah, what you were saying, right?
But one thing that I think is a common misconception about the spectrum is people see it as a grading scale. And a lot of it has to do with particular influences. Someone that I'm not afraid to speak out about is Autism Speaks is terrible. They are terrible for the community. Their charities don't benefit us the way that they want people to think. And the information that they have available to teach people about autism is not only outdated, but incorrect, which I'll get into more if you want. But pulling it back to like, so because of things like that, people see it as like they think the spectrum means more to less autistic. And that's kind of not how autism works. Something I equated it to, it's not the best metaphor, but it's the one I have right now that makes the most sense, is like the difference between a high-functioning alcoholic and a low-functioning one is that one of them's better at hiding it. They're both alcoholics. So it's the same thing with autism. Like, I can speak and articulate, and I've learned to cope with the things I've struggled with. That doesn't mean I stopped struggling with them. It just means I got better at hiding it. I'm still autistic at the end of the day, you know, and that's why I like bringing up that I didn't know how to speak at first, because there was every bit the chance that I wouldn't have figured it out. I happened to figure it out. But up until then, I literally just didn't articulate, you know. And so what I tell people, and it's even like a thing you can Google, is like what the actual spectrum looks like. The spectrum describes sectors of functioning compared to a non-autistic person and what levels we're at in each of those sectors. So it kind of looks more like a color wheel you might see like at when you go look for paint at the store, they have palettes of colors. It looks closer to that. It's like a circle, not a graph. So like something I function in more than other autistic people is that I can articulate and I can take the time to problem solve. But I didn't always have that. And things I still struggle with are I have a developmental delay sometimes. Sometimes it's a thing that sometimes annoys my parents, but I have to remind them, is like sometimes I'm hearing everything they're saying, but it takes a few seconds for my brain to kind of sort the words out.
Oh, wow.
And that's why sometimes I freeze, or sometimes my answer's like 5 seconds late.
Yeah, because I was wondering about that, like the day-to-day struggles as somebody who has autism.
Yeah.
Like, what are some things that are you need to put a little bit more effort to? You already talked about the hello and the greetings.
Right.
Are there any other things like?
Another thing is, this is also part of ADHD as much as autism, is something called executive dysfunction, which I kind of explained earlier. The metaphor I use is like when you think of like a car. A car has a wire that connects the starter, where you put the key in, to the spark plugs that connect to the engine. So even though it's the right key for the car, and even though the spark plugs are fine, for some reason there's like a small snag in the wire that connects them, and sometimes the spark doesn't go all the way through. So it's like, even though I know how to do something and I know I'm supposed to do something, I just don't. And it's not because I don't, go back to what I said before, it's not because I don't want to. I don't know why I don't. I just don't. Another part of that is like I'm easily distracted, which can be costly because I'm the one that cuts the clips for our podcast. And so sometimes I will go to the apps where I'm supposed to collect them, and I just end up watching the videos.
That's funny. I also wanted to ask, I just think it's interesting because I feel like it's often portrayed differently in media, and I wonder if you feel like it's accurately portrayed in media, because I know you said it varies, so
Right.
everybody's different. But do you feel like the way that we see it in pop culture is pretty equal to your experience?
Um, I want to say that it's getting better.
Mm.
And I always add that at first because I come off judgmental when I talk about it because it is not great. Um, Media tends to be like 5 to 10 years behind medicine in a lot of these terms. Not just with autism, but like in general, with mental and physical medicine. And so um, they're going off of what they know rather than what's current. And one thing that I think there's two things that happen because of this. The first thing is often the portrayal is very literal, and it kind of has to be. The way writing translates into visual forces it to be more theatrical, more
In your face, right? More
yeah, like it has to be simple and direct so that people immediately understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And so because of that, they go with a very old-fashioned version of autism, which kind of limits it, and it goes back to the bias I mentioned. So a lot of the autistic people you're seeing are almost always cis, young, white males, like between 12 and 18. And because of that, it adds to that whole stigma that people can't understand that anyone outside that group can also be autistic. There have been recent characters that have been verified and are kind of a step forward, like the last Power Ranger movie, the live action one, the Blue Ranger. They still never said it outright, but they heavily implied that he was on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that.
Or like there's some instances that I absolutely don't like. The two shows that come up the most because they're the most popular, and I feel bad that so many people like them, and I'm like, they're not good represent. Is Atypical and The Good Doctor.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I think you told me about the Good Doctor, right?
No.
No,
I
you
was
did
talking
not.
about House.
Oh, was it House? The I am a doctor. I am a doctor. No,
No,
that wasn't
someone
you.
else.
I
No.
swear.
No.
I swear that was you. No, I
No.
thought it was. My bad. My
And
bad.
I get it. This adds to another concept that I talk about a lot, especially when more neurodivergent people are being included in reality shows. I get why people like it, and I know that nobody means to look at it as that way. Nobody realizes that that's what's happening. They just enjoy the character, you know. If there was another reason why that character act that way, they'd still like the character for their same reasons, you know. Like if it wasn't an autistic person, if it was like a robot or an alien who just didn't understand how humans worked, the same hilarity would ensue, so there would be no issue. But it's when they specifically put the label autism and they specifically put it in that box that it does affect us because it's not, you know, autism is being represented to the writer's point of view, but I'm not being represented, you know. And those two shows are specifically still like resemblance of that concept of like it's still cis white males. There are other shows that have experimented with. There's a show, I can't remember what it's called right now because right when it came out, I stopped watching Prime to save money.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a show on Amazon Prime that's written by autistic people, and it's like varying. There are different ages. Really? There's men and women. There's non-binary people. There's different races. And that's like a bigger step forward than a lot of what I've seen before. There's definitely also been improvements in writing. Grey's Anatomy is one show. My stepmom watches it, so I watch it with her sometimes. That show's improved. That show's tried to keep up with like modern depiction because there's an old doctor character from like season 3 who was a woman, but she was still very much like very literal, very blunt, and she would only talk about the physical symptoms that were known about autism at that time. And so she kind of came off like a robot. And what ended up happening is nobody liked that character, so she was written off the show. Versus, I want to say season 16, where there was a younger child character, and I think this might have been a person of color, and it still was a little too literal, but it was much more current with like how doctors are learning to newer doctors are learning to interact with neurodivergent patients. Because that's another thing. It's a weird rule. You don't get diagnosed by a psychiatrist or a therapist. You get diagnosed by a physician. So they have to follow the literal criteria, and that's in like the real world, which is a weird process for me.
What do you mean, like the literal? Like, so physician is like the physical aspect of what autism is. What do you mean?
Like, if a doctor recognizes physical attributes that are part of the criteria, like refusal to make eye contact, fidgeting, repetitive, non-linguistic sound. So like they hum or they moan or they like grunt a lot because they're uncomfortable, but they don't say anything. A lot of the just very visual things that people are used to, those are the criteria that doctors look for. And unfortunately, like that's one of the main ways of getting diagnosed is through your physical doctor instead of a therapist. I was different because I pursued diagnosis. So we got an assessment by a therapist who agreed with the idea that I might be autistic. And then after that, we went through specialists, which is kind of, I wouldn't say hard to do, but it's not common. Usually they tell you that you have to go through your physician first, and that leads to a lot of misdiagnosis and dismissal. Honestly, like I want to say my biggest fighter for my benefit, like to get me help that I needed, was my mom. The second that she thought that I might be autistic, she wanted to be sure, and so we got the assessment first, and we tried to sign up with a regional center, and through that process, we saw 2 psychiatric specialists who specifically researched developing children with autism. So, like, not just children, but specifically children who are becoming adults. So from ages 14 to 18 was their specialty. Because that was the thing. Now you hear about a lot more adults being diagnosed, but before, a late diagnosis meant after 12. So I was considered a late diagnosis until recently. And
I find that interesting just because I feel like, well, culturally, you and your brother, you guys are Mexican American, right?
Right.
Yeah, I find that interesting because I know culturally, I mean, and you can see this even beyond just our specific culture, but to just kind of hone in, I think specifically Mexican Americans have a big stigma on mental illness.
Yeah.
And you brought it up a little bit before about how your uncles, your tios, and your tias were kind of like, that didn't exist. It's just more of a focus issue. It's more of a choice that you're making.
Yeah.
How did you overcome that? And it seems like your mom was a big part of that. How did she help you do that? Like, did she explain to your uncles or aunts or?
Yeah, she explained it the best that she, because we were learning together. So basically, she would recite what she was told to the best of her knowledge. And whenever, I think it became a thing of that distinction between what I am and not capable of. If it was something I couldn't help, she was very quick to defend me in circumstances like that. And other than that, it was mostly just that she was constantly looking for resources, not only to further our understanding of it, but also that would help me function as like she tried to look for programs that might help me develop specialties that could help find work. She helped me find. She actually put me in a social behavioral class that kind of taught me to like talk to strangers. That was kind of the goal of it. And it was mostly like a group therapy thing, but the idea was us practicing talking to people that we didn't know outside of that class. She did things like that. And then after a while, it was a combination of me kind of looking on my own so that I would always know like what my rights were as a disabled person, and also just the rising interest in autism in general. And I would say, ironically, TikTok became a huge resource for autistic people because it was finally a way, like I said, when you look online, it looks like there's a lot of us, but it's because we're all talking to each other. in our individual circles, we're still that 1% of society, that 0.01%. So it's like maybe 80% of my following on TikTok is autistic, but in my day-to-day life, with the exception of possibly my brothers, I'm the only person I know that's autistic.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's interesting because we were talking about on a recent podcast about how there's kind of like this mass hysteria within like the younger generation. I would say like our generation, Gen Z,
Right.
where a lot of people are self-diagnosing themselves with autism. They think that they carry a lot of those attributes. And I was wondering if you've heard of that, and if I was wondering for your perspective on that.
I have, and it is a very like complicated issue because it depends on who's looking at it and where they stand with it when they're talking about it. Because there's two versions of it happening. One of them is the assumed version where people who aren't autistic are seeing people get popular with the diagnosis, and they're seeing people who have self-diagnosed, and because they think that it's possible for someone to just accept that and lie about it, and because I'll even say there's instances of very young people who have actually done that, they impose that stigma on all self-diagnosis. Like, I only know of one specific person. I don't remember their name. They deleted their account. This was 5 years ago. But when TikTok was getting popular, who claimed autism but wasn't actually autistic. And they did it for clout. And because of that one person, people put that stigma on anyone who was self-diagnosing. And what I tell people is I always recommend stuff like the RADS-R test. It does not count as an official diagnosis. It used to be part of how they determine criteria for medical doctors. But research had shown that it was not 100% reliable, and it was more accurate when self-imposed than when conducted by a physician. They found that people understood the questions more when they were reading it themselves than how it was described by someone who's not autistic. So it does not count as a diagnosis, but I recommend it to people because of that fact, because when you're an autistic person and you're reading the questions of the RADS-R test, they are phrased in such a specific way that if they make sense to you and if you're relating to the experiences they're describing, there's a higher possibility that you are autistic. And so what I tell people is, like, if they're hearing these experiences, these specific, based on the criteria and based on the consistent struggles and research of not only of autism itself, but by people that are autistic, if you're relating to that consistently, then yeah, a self-diagnosis could be considered valid. And I tell people the only reason to pursue like a clinical diagnosis is if you believe that you are in need of benefits or assistance. Like, I pursued a diagnosis because I was struggling in school. I was bad at note-taking. I was bad at doing homework, which, on a side note, I think homework is a dumb idea.
You think homework's dumb?
I think, yeah.
Why is that?
For me, for a grade to be dependent on something that you could easily cheat at, for the sake of, I remember a teacher one time saying, and this was when I was in school, it wasn't my teacher, I was in detention, I don't remember why, but I remember the teacher saying, well, it's not about the actual memorization, it's about training you to do grunt work. It's teaching you how to do a job. And it's like, okay, so then there's no reason to do homework, because when you get a job, they show you how to do the job. Like, that's what training's for. There's a 90-day period at every job to do that specifically. And people who fail at school still do that without any problem. Like, homework is useless in my mind, especially if a kid's acing the tests, homework shouldn't matter. Because that's when you're stuck in a room where you have to remember the material in order to pass. And I got through elementary school and middle school almost entirely because I always passed the tests. And then it changed in high school because the percentage was lower. I think in those schools, it's like 50% of your grade. In high school, at least at the time, I think it was like 30%. So you had to do the homework. And that's where I struggled. I struggled for other reasons, which is why I needed what's called an IEP. they changed. They put me in classes where note taking was different, and how the assignments were structured was different. And one thing that I think was changed was I was given more time to make up homework if I missed it, but also if I was done with this, I was allowed to do homework in class. Like if I had 20 minutes left before school, I could start the homework then, and that way there was more chance of me finishing it, and then I just had to leave it in my backpack and bring it back the next day. I kind of lost where we started.
It's okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I just asked you about homework. Well, it's just, I guess, adding on a little bit more. I actually recently saw somebody explain the history of school and talked about how the whole reason that the education system exists is for that, is to kind of get you ready to become a worker.
Right.
Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah.
It's insane because I feel like your take is pretty accurate. It's basically making you conditioned to just do, like you described, grunt work.
Right, because like when you go to a continuation, I haven't gone to continuation school, but I know people that have, and they've like shared how it works with me. You get a booklet, and the whole thing is you're relearning the material and you're filling out the booklet, and as long as you complete the booklet, so it's like you're not getting daily homework. You just have one book. You have to finish that book by the end of the year, and that's it. And that is actually how like schools in Europe work, where you get homework, but it's the book. You fill out the book. The book is where you take notes. The book is where you fill out questions. The book is where you do homework. So it's a lot more simplified, and it's a lot more accurate about you. It's more about you retaining the material than it is about you proving that you can do work. And it's not how like every school works in Europe, but there's schools that experiment with that, that have a higher rate of like they retain students longer. You know, they have a higher percentage in education in those categories.
Well, it's interesting. I remember one time I saw a statistic. I don't know. I hope it didn't come from like one of those true hustlers like pages. You know what I mean? Like the ones that are like, you know, you and your friends should be talking about stocks and shit. It was this statistic that talked about how people who on average had like C's go on to make more money than people who were like straight A students. I swear it wasn't like a bullshit like thing. And the explanation to it was because people who often strive to do more like straight A work in schools are often the ones who are more to follow rules, while people who don't do that, who are like C's and drop out or whatever, are often people who think outside the box. So like the Mark Zuckerbergs or like who else? What's the guy that everybody says? Bill Gates. They're saying like, oh, those people are the type that like, you see, they didn't do good in school, they dropped out, and they did good. I mean, it could be bullshit, but it's one thing that leans towards that theory of like the education system is good if you want to just be like a cog in the machine of capitalism, as they say.
I feel like it's also dependent on the drive. I feel like some people have different goals. You know, some of them are like, I just want to get rich, so and like fuck the school system, so I'm gonna find some way to make money without going to school or like going to college or something. Which I think is just dependent on that and just how you want to kind of succeed in life.
I don't know. Do you guys think college improved your guys' like circumstance in life? Do you think going to college made your life, your opportunities better?
I feel like college helped me a lot with networking for sure. Like learning how to like talk to people and kind of build relationships with people. But I always say that like I never learned anything. We were talking about it the other day too with like, I think it was with our cousin, and I was like, bro, I finessed the system. Like my ass didn't learn shit in like high school, college. Like I was like, he got mad at me because he's like, you're supposed to learn.
You're supposed to learn.
And I was
bro.
like, my ass just memorized shit. Like I was like, all right, I'm gonna memorize this for the test, and that's it. And then I think I was also talking to my boyfriend about it, and I was like, I feel like homework didn't even count in high school, right?
What do you mean count?
There was something in high school, 'cause we wouldn't get like D's. We would go from C straight to F, and then I think they said like homework was like option, like it didn't count for a grade or something. And people were like, then why are we going to do the homework if it doesn't really count?
But we would get in trouble.
But we would get in trouble for it. Yeah, you would go to like detention or some shit for not doing it. But it's like, it didn't really count towards anything.
It wasn't called detention. We called it homework call.
Homework call, whatever, yeah.
It wasn't that.
But yeah, and I was like, for me, that's how I was like, for a while, I was just like, I feel like it doesn't really matter. Like, my ass is just gonna memorize everything and hopefully I get a degree, which I did. So I was kind of like, but he gets mad at me when I say that.
I do get mad because I go back to like Athens. They went to college and universities because they genuinely wanted to learn something. So I'm like, there's no such thing as finessing the system.
But that's why, for me, I say a lot of it is just like what your goal is. Because my goal was to just get a degree. Like, I didn't really have like a set goal of like, oh, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor, I want to be this, I want to be that. I still don't even know. But I just wanted to get a degree just to say that I got one.
Just to flex on people?
Yeah.
Brent, do you feel like going to college opened opportunities for you?
Yeah, I think college is good for you, but I think a lot of school is dependent on the person. I feel like if you don't want to learn, then you're not going to learn. But if you go in wanting to learn, you're going to learn.
Yeah.
You know? That's why I guess I get what you mean when you're talking about like grades, right? I feel like if you don't want to learn, you know, like, oh, I just got to do this, 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 and that, and then I'll pass and whatever. But if you want to learn, I feel like it's kind of like in the gym, right? If you want to get stronger, chances are you're going to get bigger, you know? Where if you want to learn, chances are you'll get better grades, you know? That kind of thing.
So I get you, like specialty. Ryan, did you go to college?
I did for, I think, 3.5 years.
Oh, you almost did the full 4 years.
Technically, yes and no. It's part of the reason that I stopped after a while, which does not excite my parents. The short of it was I was trying to build up like a community college portfolio so that I could go to art school. I was looking into graphic design. I was also trying to look into animation. And what ended up happening, part of it was like I honestly went to the wrong school first. I went to PCC because they have a very large arts program, and especially like it was something that had recently been developed when I had graduated. But it was almost exclusively like design and sculpting and architecture. I was trying to get an animation program, and the only one of the community colleges around me was Mount Sac, which was, you know, a completely different school. And I found that not only that, but my credits didn't carry over for the classes that I was looking to. If I did try to apply to an art school, especially if I was trying to switch from graphic design to animation, I'd have to completely start all over. So 3.5 years into that, realizing that not only was it going to take forever to get my regular scholastic credits, because in those 3 years, I was still a freshman. It would have taken me another 2 to complete that because I still had to take math and reading. And that's the part they don't tell you about college is you still have to take the regular course. You can't just take what's related to your field. You also have to go to school, which is fucking boring.
Yeah, the first 2 years. Yeah, that's why. Yeah, shout out to anybody who's young. Go to. I regret not going to community college at least my first 2 years because you're right. It's literally just the core. The what are they called? The core courses.
The GE.
GE. Yeah, your GE where you basically just do. You do like bullshit.
Your general education.
And my track was also delayed for the most arbitrary reason, which is that applications go in alphabetical order. So I couldn't apply for the first month after my graduation because I was R. So I was towards the end of the list. So because of that, most of the classes I needed were full. So I only took like 3 classes a year. And that's why it was taking so long.
That's similar to what. Do you remember? I think our brother said that's what happened to him too. No.
Yeah. Well, what's happening during the recession? No.
I think so.
And I think, teachers were leaving because, you know, everything was happening. And so, yeah, it ended up happening that, like, he couldn't get his classes. I think he was also in his 3rd year or going into his 4th. And that was all happening. So he couldn't get his classes. So he ended up dropping out.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy, though, not going to school? What did you do post dropout, I guess?
Well, the primary reason that I was comfortable leaving was that I had picked up a job. My first job, well, technically my second because I was in this work program in high school. But my first official job out of high school was actually working with my brothers at an old cafe that sold loose leaf tea. It was before my mom had her shop, so it was like good practice, to be honest. Which was its own experience. That lady kind of didn't like me, and she wanted me to just be a sample guy, and she didn't mean to dislike me, you know. But she was one of those people that follows like business tips from magazines. And so she was like, all the employees have to be female. All of them have to be between 18 and
I
25.
get you.
And we have to like open the straws a certain way. We have to have a certain script for reading people.
Mm-hmm.
I was good at my job. I just wasn't, you know, a teenage girl. That's what you want.
Yeah, the exact opposite, if anything.
Yeah. So after like 7 months of that, my brothers were working. Dominic was working at a place, the place I mentioned earlier, Lost Art Liquids. He got me an interview there, and they liked me. They put me on like a temporary basis. I was like every other weekend because I was going to school. That's around the time where I decided to. At that point, I was struggling to get the classes to such an extent that I was actually only getting online classes. I wasn't even getting to go to the school anymore. So that's when I decided to stop doing that, and I started doing the warehouse gig. And the benefit from that was, at the time, I think I was getting just under minimum wage. At the time it was 15, I was getting like $13.50. So I was making enough. That plus I was living at home. I was renting my room, but you know, I was living with family. So the combination of that was what allowed me to pursue comedy at the time. So all of that combined was like what led me to leaving school.
I wanted to ask you more about your comedy too. I wanted to ask you what goes into the way you shape and you form your jokes. Do you feel like you paint a lot from your experience as a Mexican American, or what do you use to really form jokes?
The biggest thing, and it happened just a lot of it was because it was what I was experiencing at the time, was making jokes about my diagnoses, because it was the most consistent thing in my life at the time, because I was still learning about it. Sorry, I have to burp.
It's okay, it happens. Sometimes I hold it in until I can't anymore either.
Right. As long as it's not in the mic.
Yeah.
You know, I had learned so much from going to school, but now I was learning on my own. Now I was like looking up online seminars, and I was this was when TikTok was still Musically, and the biggest app was Vine. So I was on Vine a lot. There wasn't a lot of like neurodivergent, or at least neurodivergency wasn't content at the time. It was, you know, 6-second videos. There's a bunch of, but I was starting to find YouTube creators that had been finding out that they were diagnosed and stuff like that. And so it gave me a lot more information that was less clinical and more personal. It was like helping me understand how the clinical stuff turns into like the person that I am, if that makes sense. And so that gave me perspective on like old family stories that I had that made more sense now that I knew that I was like autistic and had ADHD. So I was able to turn those stories into jokes. And a lot of my biggest jokes on my TikTok page are actually jokes that I wrote way back when, like in, I want to say March of 2015. No, it was January, because I hadn't practiced them till later in that year, but I wrote them for Dominic's birthday party.
Oh.
He was organizing a lot of events back then, and so he organized one for his birthday that was a kind of a variety mic, where it wasn't exclusively comedy. Anyone could come up, they could read poetry, they could read from a book, they could tell a story. I chose to do stand-up, and I think I wrote 3 jokes that day, and those became my closing jokes for the next like 8 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this, but me and my sister actually saw you do stand-up.
Oh,
Do you
wow.
remember that, Julie?
When
We went to the Don't Fly stand-up
Yeah.
comedy.
Oh, yeah.
We actually saw you do stand-up. And yeah, you do pull a lot from the fact that you're autistic. And I actually think that's really interesting, because in my opinion, that's really intriguing, because I think it's not only like, oh, what a unique take. I think people also, in a weird way, are like, can he really do stand-up? You know, because I think people have that like stigma of like I don't know, they think like autism is like obviously the spectrum of functioning, and they're like,
Right.
oh, let's see like how this goes. But you seem really comfortable up there, like more comfortable than I see people who are on the spectrum, which I think is something to applaud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what happened with me is something that there's a similar. It's not the exact same, but there's a similar concept with people with Tourette's or with AD or with like a developed stutter, where when the more they perform, the better they get at controlling the tics, and so they can go for long periods of time without showing any symptoms of stutter or Tourette's, and that's because they're using a different part of their brain. What where those as I understand, because I don't have either, but I know people and I follow people with both. What I understand is that the struggle with those disorders comes from a communicative part of the brain, the part that like controls the individual's speech. And when they start performing, they're using a different part of their brain because it's not regular communication. It's now they are doing a character. They're doing an imposed voice. You know, like, I don't know. I mentioned Drew Lynch before. If you hear him now, he has to take time and he still stutters, but he can go longer without it showing, or it's like a lot smaller. Sometimes it's a stammer. Sometimes like his voice just like bounces a little bit. And that's practice. That's like years of speech therapy. And that's, so in a similar vein, when I'm, especially like when I'm either explaining something I know a lot about or when I am performing, this sort of alternate version of me takes over. You know, I know that it's happening. I'm doing it on purpose, but because I'm not, you know, I'm no longer like trying to order a McDonald's. Instead, I'm trying to sell you this character that I've created. So it becomes, there's like a sort of positive disassociation that happens.
That's cool.
I was gonna ask, how do you feel about working with your brother? Like, not only do you guys do podcasts, but you guys also do comedy together. How is it for you?
Honestly, it's like something that's brought us closer as siblings because I'm 3 years younger than Dominic, and I'm 3 years older than my next sibling. But I think he's only like a year and a half younger than our oldest brother. So they were always paired together growing up, and they were always like, you know, right behind each other in school. They had the same group of friends. So they were close growing up, and I was closer to my little brother. But as he and I got older, there's still that 3-year gap. So I would like develop differently. He would develop differently. And so for a large portion of my childhood, we, you know, got along, but we weren't all close, especially like me and Dominic, because like he was in high school while I was in elementary school. And then eventually, by the time he was a senior, or by the time I was a freshman, he was a senior about to graduate. And so we just we had things in common, but we didn't have any like dialogue. We didn't have any like bridge of communication between us. And it wasn't until we both became adults, and now we're both in our instead of being like a senior and a freshman, we're both just two dudes in their early 20s. And coincidentally, when I decided to start doing stand-up, so did he, for like completely different reasons. He was actually the one that introduced me to the Chatterbox in Covina. He had already been going with my older brother just to see the show, and then Steve Hernandez, who runs it, he's a big pusher for people that are like regulars to try it at least. So he was like edging them to go up at the same time that I had decided to go to Ice House. So it became a thing. It was also like we were already living and working together, so he was my ride anyway. So I just stayed in the car when he went to Mike's instead of him dropping off at home. And it's a thing we developed together. We have different styles and everything, but like we learned how to do stand-up together. We went to the same mics together, and so it became a thing where for like 4 years we hung out with each other more than literally anyone else. And because of that, we're definitely like a lot closer, and we have like better dialogue now. We have different style of telling jokes, but we have a very identical humor when it comes to like what we find funny.
Yeah, that must be really nice at the family table. You guys all got jokes, just like a family of comedians.
Yeah,
that's cool. Because Julie, I didn't realize that until you pointed out that you guys are the only other people that I know that do podcasts with siblings.
Right?
Cause we do that.
Well, because as he was talking about, because he kept mentioning Dom, I was like, you guys do podcasting and comedy together. So I was just curious as to how you feel about that. Especially, so then you're the younger one, right?
Jokes?
Each other's jokes.
I mean, there have been instances where like we've helped each other with jokes for sure, or like one of us will have a conversation that later becomes a joke. Like I know Dominic tells one that was inspired by a conversation we were having about how white people kind of rewrite history in textbooks. I'm not obviously not gonna do. Yeah, I'm not gonna like do the joke, but it's a
I was waiting for it to.
The concept is like built on the Dark Ages because I pointed out something I thought was funny, which was like in textbooks, what's described as the Dark Ages was only. It's called the Dark Ages because the church had run like most of Europe, so pursuing science was kind of taboo. You know, that's when Galileo was beheaded. That's when a bunch of dudes were murdered for their scientific beliefs. And then after that comes the Renaissance, where there's more art, more science. But that only happened in Europe. At that same time, brown people were inventing aqueducts, which led to running water. They were inventing toilet paper. They invented the number 0. So that's the conversation we were having, and that led to like a joke Dominic wrote. And then there have been jokes I did that he's helped me with. There's one specifically that I was struggling with until he said something that made it really funny. I can't remember what the conversation was.
I want to know. I feel like I'm just being
He's edging me.
I cannot remember what the conversation was, but there's this joke. One joke I wrote that I struggled with for a long time was this joke about Einstein. I had found out that Einstein was autistic. He was diagnosed as a child.
I was gonna bring that up. Damn, I should have brought it up earlier.
And the original structure of the joke was it was supposed to be a bait and switch, where I would be talking about how I struggle with dating because when people find I'm autistic, they think that I'm remedial, for lack of a better phrasing. So I bring up Einstein as an example of someone who was not only autistic, but they were like known for being promiscuous. And the original concept was supposed to be that I would sound like I was promoting Einstein, but then the more I told facts about him, the grosser he got. It'd be like, yeah, that dude was married twice. That dude, he was autistic and he graduated high school in his like when he was 13. And then it'd get into weird stuff. Like he didn't like to wear socks. He treated his wife like a slave. And the biggest thing was that he was notorious in his like group of celebrity friends for partying and like being caught with prostitutes a lot, which is real.
Are you serious?
Yeah, that's a real thing.
I did not know that. Wow.
And
now it makes sense. And Oppenheimer. Have you seen Oppenheimer? And that one, he's really promiscuous too.
Yeah.
So now it all makes sense.
Oh, that's what it was. Was Dominic pointed out the poster? There's a very famous shot of him sticking his tongue out. Mm-hmm. And Dominic is like, he said something like, it makes you rethink that poster a bit. And that's where I came up with the act at. So I completely rewrote the joke based on that phrase. And instead, I just made it sound like he was a fuckboy. And that became the new word.
Yeah. I actually remember that joke.
I always thought that picture was fake. I always thought somebody like photoshopped him sticking his tongue out.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people don't remember. Nobody knows why he did that. He was just being funny. But if I remember,
he was just being a silly guy.
One thing I remember about that photo, I think if you expand it, I could be misremembering. This could be false.
False information.
But I think this is where the joke originally came from, or the idea for the joke came from is when you expand that poster, he's with a woman that is not his wife, and it's assumed that she might be somebody that he's like having an affair with.
Really?
Yeah. So that might be like a candid shot of him.
Whoa.
You look into his eyes, and she's right there.
Does that change his inventions? Does that change E equals MC squared? Do we cancel Einstein for being a fuckboy?
Fuckman. Men ain't shit.
Not even scientific men ain't shit, bro.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
Well, the Oppenheimer guy was cheating on his wife.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he was crying over his side too.
Men ain't shit.
He's crying over his side, but his wife still took him. What does it say about women?
Wild.
I'm just kidding.
Get up.
But now that we're kind of moving towards the end of the interview session, we also all brought some topics that we just wanted to maybe hear your opinion on. Feel free to share, but it's open to all of us. One of the things that I wanted to bring up is I thought of this funny, kind of the same thing. I was talking to Brandon, and we're talking about Taco Bell and how much I low key actually really like Taco Bell, even though I'm not gonna admit that it's like Mexican food or anything, but it's one of the things that I feel like United States successfully assimilated me, and I wanted to bring up this little fun game of like ways we've been assimilated, and that was mine. I don't know if you guys have anything. If not, then I don't know. Shoot me, because I guess it didn't go anywhere. But I just wanted to think of ways that we've been assimilated. Like another one that I can think of is beans. I'm not like the biggest like beans fan.
Damn.
Yeah, I know. Damn.
Fake Mexican.
I see everybody unsubscribing right now. I see everybody pause the episode and leave. You guys don't have anything like that?
That
Ways that you've been assimilated? Ryan, do you know? Are you first gen? You are, right?
I'm third gen.
Third gen,
I think.
really?
Yeah.
Really?
It's a little complicated because on my mom's side, like different relatives moved at different times, but I think in general, on my dad's side, he was 2 when he came over, so I think just counted it as first. I think technically I'm third gen because my grandma came over, then my mom, then me.
Okay. What's a way that you feel like you've been assimilated into the American culture? Another thing that I don't know if you want to take this, but one thing that you brought up is there's this like weird urge to sometimes like really want to be patriotic, and like is when you see those edits like on TikTok where it's like raw, like yeah, what's that Kevin James where he's like, gentlemen, start your engines, and he's at NASCAR. I feel like there's that one really makes me feel assimilated, like they got me, like I feel proud.
Well, I actually have this story that I tell on stage. Well, I have a joke, but the story behind it is, I grew up not knowing I was Latino. The short explanation is like it's mostly because of my autism. It's like nobody ever said it out loud, and and
I mean, you're not wrong.
yeah, like most of the kids in my school were brown or like light skinned Latinos, and everyone learned Spanish as a second language because of school. So I assume that's where everyone learned it from. You know what I mean? Like all the police were Mexican, the mayor was Mexican, all my teachers were Mexican. So I never had a reason to question that wasn't the norm. And then I'm on a trip we're in Texas, we're going somewhere, I think for fireworks or something. We're all packed in the car with my dad and my uncles and my brothers. And they started making fun of my older brother because when we were growing up, he was always like darker skinned than we were. So they would make the joke that he was adopted. And they're making this joke, and then someone says, we're Mexican, not he's Mexican. And so I was like, wait a minute. What did you just say? I was like, not upset, but I was like caught off guard. I was like, we've been Mexican the whole time. And my dad's like, yeah, where do you think you come from? Like, your grandparents are Mexican. He's like, yeah, but that's their problem. I was born here. That's all I know. Yeah.
That's actually pretty good. That is pretty good. Yeah, I have like the similar thing. I've told it like a million times, but when I was a kid, same thing. I thought everybody in the world was basically Mexican, at least who wasn't like Asian or black or white. I was like, everybody else is just Mexican. What do you mean?
He's like, Salvadorians don't exist.
Yeah, and it's crazy now because my girlfriend's Guatemalan, and she tells me that's such like a terrible way to think of things because like it excludes so many Latino identities.
Yeah,
and I'm like, I know, I was a little kid, I didn't know, like I'm sorry, but she hates it now because sometimes I accidentally do it. Like I call like Latino stars, like I'm like, they're like Mexican, right? And she's like, no, they're like, it's like Colombian or like Puerto Rican and stuff. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I just like, my head just goes there. Maybe that's like, is that the opposite of assimilation? I just assume,
Well, it's like, what's his name? The guy from Zorro, where they're like, oh, he's Latino, but he's actually Spanish.
Oh, yeah.
Antonio Banderas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, he's an icon. He's a Latino icon, but he's not Latino.
Yeah. Do we give him the pass though? Has he earned it?
You guys tell me.
I feel like, honestly, I get the vibe that he wouldn't care if we gave him that pass. He's comfortable telling people he's Spanish.
Isn't he like Dakota Johnson's stepdad?
Is that true? Really?
Isn't that?
Who's her mom?
Her mom's I don't know her name.
Sherry something. She's very famous. I just don't remember.
Oh,
her name.
really?
Yeah,
No,
I
I
think
didn't
because her mom is also an actress, no?
The only thing I remember confirmedly about her mom is she played the bird in Stuart Little too.
Oh yeah.
That's all I remember about her. The bird.
Oh yeah.
Sue is the mom of the lady from 50 Shades of Grey.
Brandon, you don't think you can give people the pass because you're not full blooded?
Yeah. Antonio Banderas is Dakota Johnson's stepdad.
Oh
Yeah.
damn.
Because I think they got married.
Do you have the name of the mom?
I think you. What if I give you the pass and I give you an extra pass?
I don't think a lot of people would really like that.
But then what do you give? You can't give anything
I don't
because
give
you're
anything.
mixed with everything.
Yeah.
Brandon, how have you been assimilated? Did you think of anything?
I think I'm just existing because
Just existence.
I'm mixed. So
Everything you do.
yeah.
You have cheeseburgers. You didn't try mole until recently,
Yeah, it
which
was
is
pretty
kind of
good.
crazy.
I just found out that there's different kinds of mole. I've only ever known the one made from cocoa.
Yeah. There's different. There's green. There's I think they call mole negro, where it's like that one's I think Oaxaca. I think
Interesting.
there's even red. Yeah. There's different kinds of mole.
Her name is Melanie Griffiths.
Oh, I was way off. I don't know where I got Sherry.
I don't know who that is.
What's it called? I don't know. I was trying to think.
You still don't know?
How I
You're just
think.
not assimilated?
No.
Liar.
too Mexican.
Your boyfriend's white.
Okay.
That's like, I feel like that has to mean you were assimilated some way.
How?
I don't know.
How?
I don't know.
I
I
don't.
would say, sorry, I
No,
don't.
you gotta do it.
That's probably another thing I don't talk about a lot because as I've like gotten older, it's just not a thing that I think about as much as I did when I was in high school. But I had a thing for like white girls with red hair because my favorite superhero was Spider-Man. So anyone that looked like MJ, I was like, I'm down for.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Well, the segment was also inspired by my cousin, who he was telling me that he loves white women, and I was like, I feel like, and the way he was talking about it, I was like, I feel like this is because United States media has told you to like white women, so that's how you like them. I mean, obviously, there's nothing wrong with liking white women or white men. Obviously, like I'm not bagging on you, Julie.
Sure.
was
What?
different.
There's nothing wrong. He's technically like my brother-in-law if he's your boyfriend, even though you guys aren't there yet. But he's like a brother-in-law.
I do think it's definitely a thing permanent. I talk about it a lot in like how nerd shit is represented, like superhero stuff shows, where you do see over the last 20 years the progression is always not the main character is brown, but their love interest is brown or their best friend is brown. Like the Flash is a good example of that.
Invincible
where-
too.
Yeah. Or like what's another example?
I mean, in modern day, Tom Holland Spider-Man, Zendaya.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I see it.
And his best friend.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they did it in both times.
Oh, yeah. That's cool though. I like that they're implementing because New York isn't just.
It's definitely a good way to like include. I definitely think it's important to just show regular people that aren't stereotyped. Like, I remember watching old comedy movie, like Mel Brooks. No offense. Well, I don't know if we want to offend Mel Brooks or care, but I saw Blazing Saddles again, and there's a lot of things that do not hold up about that film. It's a lot
Really?
of N-word and F slurs. But there's one Mexican in that entire film who's just there to go, Dios mío. And then you never hear from him again. He's just there to be outlandish and like surprised.
Yeah. Would you say you're a big comic book fan?
I was definitely bigger in high school, which is ironic.
Because you have the Batman shirt on.
I followed the storylines a lot more. Now a lot of it is me instead of tracking down the books like a proper nerd, I just research the storylines to catch up on what's changed.
I used to do that when I was a kid.
But before I had a collection, they're all reprints, but I have like a issue 10 of Spider-Man. It's like a 10th anniversary version.
Oh,
I
wow.
think I also have the first time they introduced Spider-Man 2099.
Oh wow.
And then I have, what is it? There's a series of Superman comic books called The Reign of the Superman.
I actually know.
This immediately follows
The
Death of Superman.
You see, I know.
Nerds.
The only reason
Just
I brought
kidding.
it up, the only reason I brought it up is because since we're talking about like the racial aspect of like just like media, I wanted to ask you like, what do you think of like race swapping specifically because you brought up Superman? did you guys hear about recently? This is a long time ago. It didn't end up happening, but they were gonna have cast Michael B. Jordan as Superman.
Yeah, there was people.
What do you
I think that was another like fan push. The studios were what's the word? Playing with the idea because that's what like fans were asking for, but I don't think it was ever a legitimate like.
Oh, it wasn't gonna like
option.
actually move on.
Yeah, I think it was just something that got hype.
Yeah, but I just wonder, I guess, conceptually of that, because I mean, Superman isn't real, right?
Right. There is so there's two like hands in it. On one side, you want because I do talk about this a lot, so I'm trying to figure out where to start with it. The biggest thing is like the people that hate on it. Usually, they're just coming from a place of comfortability, and it's like in that sense, I think that they are, in a way, being closed-minded because they're immediately disliking it for the most arbitrary of changes when you think about it. Like, because like you said, these are comic book characters. They don't actually exist. And a lot of these changes aren't character changes. They're mental. A lot of these changes aren't like Hal Jordan is suddenly a black guy. It's like, no, Hal Jordan gave the ring to somebody who's African American. And then that guy gave it to somebody who's Korean. You know, they still exist in the comics. Nobody got rid of them. They just have a different story now. Like Jon Stewart, who is the African American Green Lantern, retired like 5 years ago. But he still has comics about him. So I do understand that on one hand, what we want is new characters, new stories that resemble us and represent us, because trying to push somebody into that role has that immediate backlash, because it's like everyone wants Clark Kent. Nobody wants, you know, everyone wants Peter Parker. Nobody wants these new people. Or at least the majority, which is, you know, the biggest market for any consumable item is, I think, 18 to 25-year-old straight white guys. So when they don't like it, then that's when there's a big roar about it. But the counter to that is there are people that like it. Like that's what happened with Miles Morales. You know, there was such an uproar about a black Spider-Man, but now he's like one of the most well-known versions of Spider-Man.
That's true.
And then the other side of it, it's, you know, sometimes we have to play the game that way, because the thing that's happening is just like in movies, there's people that are trying to decide if their brand wants to represent that change. So you have these new characters coming out, but nobody wants, you know, sometimes nobody wants a new person. They want Spider-Man, they want Batman, they want Superman. So they're not entertaining these new guys. And so those guys never get off the ground. So what the people that are running the company see is new characters don't work. Stick to the old characters. And if we want to do a change so that we seem like on board with everything, then we just change those existing characters. So that's the thing, is like a lot of it has, you know, a lot of it comes from the studios and the publishers, but a lot of it is also on the fans to be open to that in the first place. Yeah. Because there's a lot of great, like 3 years ago, Al Madro came out with a comic book that is like successful now, and it is honestly a really interesting concept. It's called Primos.
Yeah,
and it's the short of it, from what I remember, is it dates back to, I think, the original Mayan civilization. It might be Aztec.
Oh, really?
Because there's this common conspiracy theory that the reason they disappeared is that they discovered space travel, and they discovered how to make versions of technology that would function similar to how it functions today. But because they left, what was left behind decayed and turned to dust, so there's no evidence of it. So this comic book plays on that concept, that two of the last like royal family of Mayan lineage discovered space travel. So they went into space and they spent the next like 2 million years, I forget the actual timeline, in space. They become immortal from technology and just experiencing universes that we don't know about. So then they come back to modern day Earth, and they see what happened not only to civilization in general, but to their civilization specifically and to their descendants. And one of them has an uproar about it. One of them is so upset about this that he decides he is going to destroy the planet. So he uses the technology that he's gathered from his travels to become a supervillain. The other one wants to give the Earth a second chance. He wants to protect humanity. So I forget how, but he finds the last living people, I think, of his lineage, or of like the last king of the Mayan society. And they happen to be three cousins. And he imbues them with magical items. I think they each get a weapon. And I don't remember all of them. One of them has a staff. And one of them has a really... they're all inspired by actual weaponry from the indigenous people of
Mexico.
the Americas.
Mhm.
Yeah. One of them is this long bat. There's a similar weapon used in like Maori culture, New Zealand indigenous people. It's like this long... It kind of looks like a wiffle ball bat, but it's spiked... like, what are they called? Arrowheads along the sides, like serrated blades, and it's used kind of... The fighting style is similar to people that use, like... I'm getting very nerdy about weapons right now. It's kind of used like a mallet, but it functions as a sword. And it's a really cool weapon. Another one gets a staff. Another one gets a type of club. They all get special abilities and powers, and then that's like where the comic jumps off.
Yeah, well, I think that's just cool because I think it touches on the point that you made earlier that I think is really insightful. Where it's like, yes, maybe it's not such a big deal to race swap some of the well-known characters, but what I think would be even greater is to just make completely original characters that represent those people, because, like you said, that avoids the backlash while also creating original stories like that. You know.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting because I didn't know it would be that much of an intricate answer, but I really like the way you answered that question.
Yeah.
But moving on a little bit, do you guys have any topics that you guys have in mind to speak about, or are you guys free to move on?
I guess I was just gonna have one more question about how like you're very expressive of your autism and stuff. What would you say is something that you would like for other people to be, I guess, aware or know about when, I guess, being around people who are autistic or are on the spectrum, kind of to, I guess, in a way, like the way people should treat it, you know, or like come up about it?
It's hard to say. I would say that if someone that is in your daily life, if you know, if there's a relationship that you have that has consistency in it, where you're constantly interacting with someone, I think that while it doesn't immediately affect you as an individual, I think it only benefits your relationship with that person to put in the work yourself to learn about the disorder. Only going off of what they tell you, or only going off of, you know, a lot of people who don't research it, their idea of autism is a collection of snippets from general media and online interaction. And I can guarantee you that in no way is accurate to how it works. And I highly recommend looking into it for yourself. If, you know, you don't know anyone and you just don't want to, nobody can make you. I can't make you. But I always recommend, even if you don't know anyone who's autistic right now, but you just want to understand people better so that you don't, you know, so that you're not putting down someone for no reason, I highly recommend looking into it yourself. Because there's a lot of resources available. It's just nobody is looking at them.
Yeah.
Unless you're talking about Autistic Speaks. I always retain... I don't know if you guys cuss on this podcast, but...
Yeah, you can curse.
I tell people all the time, fuck Autism Speaks. Like, they're not good.
Yeah, and I asked that, and again, I'm very grateful that you're here because, like, again, how I said in the beginning, like, I've never known anything about it, and I think that's for sure goes to, like, I just haven't really known anyone to kind of, like, do the research on, like, what I should be aware of as myself. So it's really great that we had you here today, and I just wanted to know that just so that I know that in the future and, like, maybe now I can maybe, like, do my own research and kind of, like, be a little more, what's the word, like, aware and kind of put that into account that, you know, that could be something.
Yeah, I agree. You educated me a lot too on autism and kind of just ways to interact, and like, because I think I didn't realize this until before we got into this podcast, but I think I also have a lot of ignorances about it, and I think you helped me really educate myself and really advocate for, like, okay, it's not this way, it's more this way, you know. And I obviously don't know everything yet, but you helped me at least know there's resources out there to educate myself more.
Yeah, and I forget the name. I'm bad with names of things
Mhm.
because of my ADHD. But um, uh, not to self promote, there is a link in my link tree on all of my social media to a website that is actually a very good alternative resource. Um, because it's a foundation that is not only dedicated to this perspective of autistic people rather than a lot of other charities, again, specifically Autism Speaks, they're focused on helping non-autistic people deal with autistic people in a very negative purview. There's even an old ad that compares autism to like cancer. Um, this other website, again, I wish I
Oh,
remember the
wow.
name, but I have the link for it in my. That's why I mentioned
Mhm.
the link. They're focused on the perspective of the autistic person, and a lot of people that work for the foundation are autistic themselves.
Oh, cool.
So it's in my opinion, a greater resource.
Okay, cool. Hopefully we can put the link in the bottom in the description. Brandon, you have anything to add?
Yeah, thank you for educating us. I found this very insightful,
Yeah.
very deep. I think I commend you for being able to talk about something very personal, because I think obviously it affects a lot of people, but I think when it comes to mental struggles, it can also be a deeply personal experience for different people. Like, I'm not too familiar with autisms, but I am familiar with different mental health issues, and I know that, like I just said, they can be deeply personal in terms of like my experience is completely different to yours, you know. So I find it very commendable, and I applaud you for being able to talk about that. Just because I don't know, just in the exposure that I have on a lot of my social media, I see a lot of that. It's like I mentioned earlier that it's a state of mind. Like you can get out of it. So I find it. I would have assumed that it's a very defeating task sometimes to be able to talk about something like that, and then kind of get the feedback from, I guess, the more mainstream audience of like,
Right.
well, that's not real, you know. So I think it's very important to have people like you, so outspoken and so articulate, and I'm pretty happy that you gave us the opportunity to give you the platform on the podcast. So
Thanks
thank you for
coming,
joining us.
Ryan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
thanks for coming, Ryan. Why don't we go ahead and give just a shout out to our
Yeah, so before we
Patreons?
send everybody off, I just want to give a shout out to all our patrons. Shout out to UL, shout out to Jada Chicano, shout out to Daniel Villanueva, shout out to Sarah without an H, shout out to Carlos, and shout out to Steven Carbajal. I hope I'm saying that correctly. You can sound off in the comments if I'm not.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to Ryan of Un Poquito Podcast. Please check out his podcast. It's a wonderful podcast. The link will be in our description. But thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.
See ya.
Bye.